So let's go back to Foucault one more time. For Foucault, if you want to understand the real power seething beneath the surface of things, he referred to it as biopower. And Foucault found it to be a social control of our bodies, including mine, by institutions. And he felt what happened in the modern world. And again, what we're getting to is this idea of how does the deep state, these oligarchs, rule through secrecy, through empire, through monopolies, through control of the information. So he said what they masterfully did is during the Age of Kings, you could see the visible power. Most likely it was there's always been powers behind the throne, of course, but you could see the power, so you could direct your energy at that power structure. But democracy was kind of a clever innovation because it spread it out. So you have this illusion, and sometimes there's levels of control and power exerted by the people, but perhaps not as much as there was, believe it or not, in the Age of Kings, because you could get the people together and attack the king. And that's channeled in democracy. Go into the voting booth. We're going to bore you with these elections so much that half of you maybe will drag your feet over there to do it in the first place, and then you're supposed to vent whatever. And so that's what Foucault's talking about. It was a clever cutout that democracy was in place, and so we moved the visible power. Now we have the true power being. And it's elusive. Rational discourse can't quite explain it, how it works and how it operates, but it's very comprehensive and thorough in terms of how it completely, as we would want to say, inculcates or socializes the human being. And this is it should be an antithetical to the notion of an independent, healthy republic that was the ideal that was created in the United States. And that's why republic was formed rather than a democracy. This has always been understood as the necessary tool of the oligarchs. To turn it into mod rule, it disintegrates, and it can either be continually wielded as an oligarch, or they can reframe it and operate just more directly, as what seems to be appearing in the world today. In other words, kind of come to the forefront once again. So for Foucault, he's ultimately looking at who decides, who lives, dies, what's healthy, what's normal. Okay. And I'm going to suggest here we have to read Foucault at an esoteric level. At an exoteric, what he's putting out there for the university students is this idea that it's a system of institutions that just kind of works on its own. It arrived with the evolution of Darwinism in the 19th century. So very connected to this idea of evolution, and by implication, a controlled kind of evolution toward a certain outcome. But what I'm going to suggest is when you read into an exoteric, you have to dig a little deeper into Foucault there. There's something that we can actually get our hands on. But again, when Foucault, his exoteric, what's put out there for the universities is this idea that there's no single agent and it's elusive. So we're just kind of, it's the ultimate in limited hangout speak. Let's just kind of, chase our tails around and think about it. But when you cut to the chase, what he's really saying here, you have to dig a little deeper with this idea in mind, is that it comes around through the innovation of the control of the social science disciplines, the science, the math, the political economy, the stats. Now we're increasingly saying the cosmology and so forth. And he calls this the secrets of empire, controlling through monopolizing the information. So as science creates new discoveries, make sure you can control those discoveries. There's a whole branch of research that goes into the creation of the Royal Society in London and the esoteric foundations of the Royal Society, if anybody would like to research that. But that's very much where he's going with it. But Foucault's especially interested in controlling public opinion. So although he's saying that these systems are just there, no, there's somebody that created the systems and is in fact controlling the information in those systems. To control the body, you have to control the mind and shape the perceptions. It comes back to Plato's cave. That's how they rule. Okay. And you got to create those institutions so that the person that goes to the back of the cave gets a glimpse, looks behind the curtain, sees the sun, comes back, and is a pariah to those people because that they can't live with that construction. And so what's going on right now with people sort of waking up and finding they can't talk to their friends or family, this is nothing new. These dialectics and the structure of society has been created, so that's how it works. It's part of what Foucault called the secrets of empire. And so he says modern society marks, with the creation of this state system that we have created in the 17th century, it was essentially operates as a protection racket. And that's why we say oligarchs work essentially like the mafia, or as we've said a number of times from 20th century thinkers, it's a legalized mafia. It's a protection racket that works in terms largely of perpetuating this war economy. And through that war economy, read the book 1984. I mean, that's kind of a little bit of the revelation of the oligarchical method. So he gets into this idea, ultimately what's going on with Darwin is this creation of a true race, says Foucault. There's a racial discourse that's going on, but ultimately he's getting to it. There's some kind behind this age-old project. There's this idea of a true race, or what most novelists and authors and people in high politics have called a master race. And so he says, rumbling away, because we're talking about a war economy, it needs to always be there. Foucault's words, rumbling away beneath the political power, is a secret. This is why I'm doing biopolitics, past and present. There is something here. Hang with me. There's a secret, primitive, permanent war that constitutes the power relations of society, but it's controlled dialectic, okay? And it's controlled so that that's the motor force to take us in a direction. That's why we're using words like esoteric and eschatology. Esoteric means it's occulted, it's hidden, but there's an eschatology, there's an endpoint, there's a purpose that people are supplying both sides of every war, designing race struggles and ideological struggles and pushing those forward and so forth. There's a designed end. And we're moving toward that. And we're going to continue to refine that in a way through our combination of biopolitics and their esoteric eschatology, that we're going to have a unique and penetrating perspective on what's going on in the world, even if there's only 5 people with me. Okay? So biopolitics, then for Foucault, it's a matter of evolution's the key part. And that's that age-old idea of alchemical, hermetic, Kabbalistic ideas that humans are involved in their own processes, their own evolution. This is where you get apotheosis and so forth, which is very much a part of the esoteric part that we've talked about before. Controlling populations, population control. And for people that are in the know about this, the oligarchs, especially today, but they've always been this way, are all about macro global population control, worldwide population control. It's a way of saying who they think is fit and unfit, who can live and who can die. So how do they get this idea of fit? Is it serving their order, if you're useful to them, and so forth? The secrets of war, eugenics, these are all ideas that are consistent with the oligarchical rule, that are straightly and directly consistent with Foucault's idea. So he sees a new type of evolutionary biological model, a struggle for life. That's what we're all engaged in right now, a struggle for life. And what kind of life? A biological life? Well, Agamben now would say no, because the oligarchs want to reduce us to bare life. They want to give us a perspective that we're not even a spiritual or special being, spinning through space, very small in terms of the cosmos, and evolved. And you get where this idea is going. So they bestialize the human man. And that's, of course, part of this neo-feudal world that they're driving us toward. And so we went through the secrets of empire. Now, I want to get into the roots of biopolitics as it was first used. And Rudolf Kjellén, and that's spelled Kjellen. Some people will use a soft K, but you get the idea. Okay, 1864 to 1922. He was Swedish thinker. Broadly, we would call him a social scientist today, historian and social scientist, but he's also working with evolution and the hard sciences. So see what Foucault's talking about, evolution, getting right in there. And what's he going to do with this new study of Darwinism? Darwin's coming out like mid 19th century, kind of really picking up steam in the 1860s and 1870s across continental Europe. So he's going to mix this word that we use today. In fact, he coins the term. This guy's fascinating. More people should know about him. Rudolf Yelin. He's going to coin the term geopolitics. So the guy that coins the term biopolitics coins the term geopolitics. I find this fascinating, and I've never heard this from anybody else as my own investigation. That's why I'm putting it out there, so at least there can be 10 people on the internet that can pick up on this if they so choose. So he creates, if I had to center on one text that I think is significant for him, I would say the state as a living forum. The state as a living forum, 1916, right in the kind of middle of World War I there. The state is a living being. It's going to be a live idea with sort of the millennial reign and the master race idea of the Third Reich. But the state as a living form, a very pantheistic, hermetic, esoteric concept. Why? Because in the two worldviews, the biblical worldview and the esoteric, largely what I'd say, there's one hermetic, Kabbalistic worldview. Either God stands outside of creation in that story, or in this esoteric tradition, it's pantheistic, and the state itself is life, the sort of Gaia kind of idea. And I'm just leading you into some esoteric roots that are already going on here if you're thinking through this. He's influential geopolitical in geopolitics, and he's basically creating a guide for national greatness. It's just another word for empire. Okay, so he's getting people, because you remember in the modern era, our framers had to kind of, oh, empire's terrible and it's abusive. We're going to form these smaller republics, which I have argued before. USA blueprint for the New World Order was just a rouge. That it was always intended to be first a soft commercial empire and ultimately the muscle for the dominant oligarchs to shape this iteration of the New World Order. So he was largely a student of Friedrich Ratzel, German. And Ratzel was around from 1844 to 1904, a German geographer and ethnographer. So geography, physical space, and people, and the dimensional space of the collective. And he didn't coin the term biopolitics, but he's going to be the foundation. He's a real person working through evolution. This is what Foucault picked up on. A lot of people think that biopolitics begins with Foucault, but I'm really saying you have to dig back. Where does Foucault come up with this idea? And it's wrongly attributed to him. I think it really begins here with Friedrich Ratzel, the German thinker, and he's going to introduce Darwinism, evolution, brand new concept, hot off the press with Darwin and the Royal Society, and they had their continental connections. And if you ever want to get in the Royal Society, and they have their roots in the Lunar Society, where Darwin's grandfather was, a highly Rosicrucian organization with its own, great work agenda that's also tied into the Illumination societies and New Age and so forth, 20th century version. So Ratzel was very interested in cities. And when you look at the cities he visited there right around the age of Charles Darwin, they're all in the United States. He came over and did all his kind of primary work, like Baltimore, New York, Boston, Kansas City, Cincinnati. For whatever reason, he was very interested in the United States. I think he was probably doing a little geoplanning of his own. But he is interesting. Now, Frederick Ratzel, he coined the term living space. Living space. Um, you might remember this from 1938 and 1939. That was the call by the Third Reich for German expansion. So the basic assumptions here by the two of them, with the German and Swedish thinker, that all social, political, legal bonds rest upon a living whole. Again, I think that's a very pantheistic idea where everything, and it's very Kabbalistic, hermetic. You're trying to give life to the inanimate. And we'll get to that. So it's part of this project. You give it life, it gives you back. Everything is part of the one, as we mentioned in 1908 Kabbalon, which embodies the genuine and eternal, the healthy and the valuable. These terms are just loaded with biological concepts because in biology, we're trying to figure out who's sovereign. That's the person, whether it's visible or invisible, that gets to decide who lives and who dies, whether you're useful in service, whether your biology, your stock, your breeding, your being is valuable for the purpose of this grand project. So, which embodies the genuine and the eternal. So everything is one, very, very hermetic. Life serves as a mythic starting point. So biopolitics, study of life connected to geopolitics. And again, all these assumptions of oligarchs. We got the empire, we got secrecy, we got monopoly. We've already hit on these with Agamben, Foucault. And again, Agamben's going to say the ultimate idea of democracy embedded in there, it's a totality. It's heading toward this merger of the one. First, it's in theory we're all one. We seem disconnected. How many memes out there do you have to turn into in the science pages today to tell you, and that's why you're returning to the one, the singularity. Life serves the mythic starting point and normative guide. It eludes every rational foundation, precisely the words of Foucault. It eludes every rational foundation for democratic decision making. So it's not rational and ought not to be. So it truly moves me. It is not rational. Powerful. Just think of it in terms of empire. It's this desire for the body to serve the empire until it becomes the one. And it's probably led ultimately by the one, the Übermensch, and so forth. It's all being laid out there in what appears to be some sort of systematic and scientific study. However, that rests upon the idea to some extent that there would be empirical proof for Darwinism. But when we strip that garb down, and oh boy, can I get into that, that we see it's really an esoteric agenda that's garbed up in some pseudoscientific language. And if you haven't figured that one out, I dare you to at least investigate it somewhat. Biopolitics, rooted in biogeography, Darwin, organic state theory. So we're coming up with a whole theory of geopolitics that's rested on an self-admitted esoteric concept of a living whole, with the endpoint being a return. See, I mentioned that before. Reverse engineering, what they find is the origin of creation, the all. So let's just break this down. And it's predicated on Darwinism. And there's an assumption here that Darwinism has some kind of theoretical veracity. It doesn't. no matter how much it's repeated. I'm sorry, it doesn't. If that's crazy for you, okay. So, five concepts that would shape German politics then are, and you know what? Before I even go on, we can say this is shaping the New World Order. Okay. So, it's one project because these are going to go into the same concepts I'll get into, shape the foundation of the scientific man and the communist period and so forth. And they're really the ideas that are still, as Foucault would say, rumbling underneath our perpetual war, struggle for life, war economy. But one is the territorial concept. Okay. So one is that we need the organization of to get this whole together. You can substitute the New World Order here for this project. You need the physical space that, of course, is going to have a life of its own and animate. We animate ours to this as part of the one, back and forth, Kabbalistic idea, life and trying to raise up inanimate matter, sort of a Big Bang concept, another fallacy of the oligarchs. Um, Life coming from non-life. Okay. Um, so this is the organic state theory that this is esoteric, that the earth has life and of it's not inanimate. Two, there's a racial conception of the state, a racial conception of the state. I don't even know what to do with that one. So the state is physical, it's geophysical, and it carries the life of the being, the life in the blood. So here's we're getting this idea of soil and blood, fighting for some Nazi idea, but it's not just a Nazi idea. But it's got a racial component. So without this other idea that Foucault builds upon this, or a master race, it's a work in progress. It's a mediated evolution. Land in reaction to international markets. So this idea of land is going to be developed in terms of in relation to the controllers of, again, in Lenin's term, the commanding heights of the economy has to be working in sync with this project. And I think we're necessarily getting a little abstract here because that's how oligarchs put together their theories. It's supposed to dazzle you, like the magic of Disneyland, and hopefully you'll never be that person walking into the abstract art section of a museum and daring to say that the king is wearing no clothes and use your own mind. And this is really just an abstract art version of geopolitics. When you just kind of cut through it, it's conjecture based upon speculation, based upon just esoteric mush. Okay. So, number four, the social aspects of a nation um, uh, need to be organized around the culture that's connected to the land, that's going to give birth to the assumption that there's life in this inanimate earth, and it's connected back to culture. And you just see the abstraction in all of this. Bureaucracy and army would contribute to the people's pacification and coordination, a war economy. So you get this integration of geostrategies. This thing has to become greater and build to find this singleness. But one of the necessary steps in this would be militarization. You needed the guns to create this empire, but also to control the minds of the people, so that they're not questioning the project. And um, very much the situation we're at today. Um, so let me finish this, and I'm going to make sure to put up the slides of this. This is going to form what I have termed in my own dissertation in my first book, when I looked at the creation of US intelligence. It creates an epistemic community. These are the sort of experts that are kind of creating a new theoretical prism, and everybody else is going to look through their prism to get this idea of how the world works, why nations go to war with one another, and so forth. So from Ratzel to Yieling or Keeling, the Swedish thinker, all the way to Alfred Mahan, who is an American. So So interestingly, what all these people did, and I spent years doing primary research on Mahan, and he's very much connected to this idea then of empire, and is part of the Naval War College. He would have to sell this idea first to other military elites and then to the public at large, this idea that empire is good and that it's connected in this way of projecting some kind of Anglo-American superiority around the world. But that's just one iteration. The Germans had their iteration, and the Soviets had their scientific man, and people with a messianic bent have their own ideas of themselves. So it takes on many faces, but again, it's one very ancient project that's connecting biology and a conception of what an ideal race is. That ideal race needs to master over the soil and the blood of others because it's their appointed destiny. But I want to take this even a step further when we look at the contemporary biopolitics and what they're looking for as the direction of the future in terms of military strategy and scientific discourse. But I did want to finish with this idea of blood, soil, and empire. And there was an international, by definition, an epistemic community. I'll put I may or may not leave my name with this, but I'll put my footnote in terms of how this epistemic community and others epistemic communities work. And not incidentally, I don't think Foucault really coined the term epistemic community, which I believe he was a part of a transnational and transhistorical epistemic community, and he was very much participant. He was a participant, I will argue. That's why I see an esoteric Foucault participant in this project. But let me pick up on the other side with contemporary biopolitics and what is the direction of this biopolitics in the 21st century, and how does this make sense today when we look at geopolitics, when we look at scientific innovation, technological innovation. Where does this agenda consciously see itself going, and how can biopolitics say something different from or unique to the field of study that's looking at the New World Order? We'll call it that, okay? So join me on the other side. Thank you.